Murder by numbers, 1, 2, 3. It's as easy to learn as your ABCs is a song by The Police. And if you're Mabel's age, you may not realize that Sting was the lead singer of The Police. Welcome to Let's Solve Only Murders in the Building, Episode 4, The Sting, which is a movie, if you're Mabel's age or younger, you may not have seen. It's pretty good. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on our hunt to learn who killed Tim Kono. Spoilers for the first 4 episodes. If you haven't seen the first 4 episodes up through episode 4, The Sting, then you shouldn't embrace the mess. If anyone from Disney Plus, Hulu, Disney Star is listening to this, I could use access to those screeners so I could get these videos out in a more timely manner. Reach out to us at PHQ on Twitter and Instagram. As we break down these clues and as we look at these suspects, I think it's important not to assume things. In this episode 4, Mabel assumes that the poisoner of Winnie the dog is the killer of Tim Kono. I'm not so sure we should assume that. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that there could be multiple murderers, as a certain podcast host says at the end of this episode. If you're listening to our podcast here, know that in the YouTube version of it, we're putting up screen grabs of the visual clues that you'll need to know to solve the mystery. Please subscribe, follow, and on YouTube, please tickle that like button. If you don't, there's no way we'll show up at your door with a fully cooked turkey. Just saying. Next week, we'll be starting up a podcast focused on the FX adaptation of the graphic novel Y the Last Man. We've read the graphic novel, we've been waiting for this show for so long, and next week we're launching our podcast on it. For information on all the podcasts we do, at PHQ, that's the word double, the single letter P is in podcast, HQ for headquarters, at PHQ on Twitter and Instagram, facebook.com/PHQ. Because this show is so funny, starting with this episode, we're going to hand out our Last Laugh Award for the most hilarious moment in the episode. We hope our 3 podcasters on the show get the last laugh over the killer. This week, we're going to give the award to Sting for that hilarious, yet possibly not #1 hit single, I Didn't Kill Tim Kono.
I thought it was me, and I was so low, but my words didn't put a bullet into Tim Kono, oh no.
This episode felt like it really focused on the characters and maybe not so much the clues. So at the end of this podcast, we're going to cover scenes from the trailers that have not yet appeared in the show. I know some of you may consider this spoilers. Don't worry, it'll be at the very end of the podcast, and we'll give you a warning so you can jump out if you don't want to talk about trailer talk. Before we run down the suspects, let's see what episode 4 taught us about the victim, Tim Kono. The main thing was that we learned Tim lost Sting a lot of money, got fired by Sting, and we learned the name of his old investment firm, Wright and Ogilvy. The queen of crime, Dame Agatha Christie, was famous for this twist where somebody overhears a person saying, I could kill myself, or someone else saying, you should kill yourself. Then that person mysteriously dies in an apparent suicide when it was actually murder. Feels like something similar happened to poor Tim Kono. As we move to look at our usual and unusual suspects, question right at the top, listeners. Should we make Oliver's son Will a suspect? Question after this episode you might have is, how did Oliver's son Will get through veterinary school when Oliver blew all of his college fund on Splash the Musical? Now remember, Splash the Musical was happening back in 2005. If we assume that's right around the time Oliver's son Will was going to go to college, I think we can reason that Will should be about 7 years older than the Hardy Boy crew. Should we make Will a suspect? So far, he seemed much more like a functionary character, meaning a character who can come in and give a lot of exposition when needed. Should we put Will as a suspect? What do you think? We've often said that to be a fair play mystery, you do have to introduce the murderer very early on. We're through 4 episodes. That murderer better have been introduced. Will here was introduced in the very first episode. Some of you may be saying, well, what about Oscar? Well, Oscar hasn't technically in the present been introduced in the first 4, but we do know about him, so he will slide. I would say any character introduced from here on out, If this is going to be a fair play mystery, should not be the killer. Okay, tell us, what do you think? Should Oliver's son Will be a suspect? Hit us on Twitter at DoublePHQ or write a comment down below on YouTube. Let's go to the other outstanding characters, Sting. Once again, Sting lost millions to Tim Kono. Sting stayed in the building during the fire alarm, which seemed like a purposeful distraction the murderer wanted to do to get everybody out of the building so they could go kill Tim. Sting's assistant is named Anita. Sting fired Tim Kono, screamed at Tim. Is there any reason why he should still be on the suspect list? I'm tempted to kick him off. A new suspect we're going to add to the list this week was also in episode 1. It's Charles's neighbor Arnov. Arnov knows Lucy. If we assume Arnov lives on the 12th floor, he's in 12F. Arnov says Anya was just FaceTiming with Lucy. Lucy seems happy. Arnov is also friends with Cinda, the podcast host. They should be friends. Both actors were on 30 Rock. Moving on, Jan is another character we learned a lot more about this week. Jan and Charles are flirting. Do you like them as a couple? Do you ship them as a couple? What shipping name should we give them? Jarles or Chan? They went to dinner. Jan felt she had two childhoods, one before her parents divorced and one after her parents divorced, where her half-sister got to take the flute. Jan says the last guy she dated wouldn't let her go first. Have we met that last guy she's dated? Jan also talks about the first wound. Admittedly, this is focused very much on Charles, but do we need to learn Jan's first wound? We know Jan lives in apartment A, and people online say she lives on the 6th floor, aka the floor Tim Kono got onto the elevator from when we first met him in episode 1. But we have yet to confirm that. Oliver did a lot of work this week, but we're not sure there were any new clues to point to him to be the killer. The only thing you could possibly say pushing Oliver to be the killer was his insistence that it had to be Sting, and he kept putting the focus back on Sting. Trying to deflect it from someone else? Most likely not, but he's still on the list. Turning to Charles, this episode spent a lot of time on the mystery of Lucy, who we heard about back in the first episode. We start with a Happy Valentine's Day card, where Lucy wrote, if we can believe Lucy wrote this, "No mushy stuff, you're my favorite person, love Lucy." Many people feel this has similar handwriting to the suicide note. When Charles talks about his ex, he's very awkward and probably anxious, but note his nose doesn't bleed. If we can trust him, Charles says the relationship lasted 6 years. It was his ex, Emma, and her 7-year-old daughter, Lucy, and they left him when they flew home from St. Croix. Again, what do you think, listeners? We're reaching out to you again, listeners. Should we believe this story? Is this something from Brazos, the cop show? It feels like we still have a lot to learn about his relationship with Emma and Lucy, even if we do have to say R.I.P. Bugs and Porky Pig. A show on Hulu in America and Disney Plus Star around the world, getting Warner Brother characters like Bugs Bunny and Porky Pig? Whew. How they did that might be the biggest mystery of all. Turning to Mabel, she does a little bit of sleuthing on that note she found in episode 3, and it brought her to another Hardy Boys book, the 6th book, The Shore Road Mystery. She was looking at Wikipedia, so let's just look at what Wikipedia says. While riding their motorcycles along the shore road, the Hardy Boys, along with their pal Chet Morton, meet a local fisherman who just had his car stolen. The 3 boys give chase, but are delayed due to an accident with a horse-drawn hay wagon. Further down the road, they find their chum Jack Dodd and his father being questioned by the police because of the stolen car was found in their yard, and Jack's fishing rod was in the back seat. The Hardy Boys resolve to solve the case and clear their friend's name. While investigating the case, the Hardy Boys identify suspects, including a band of tramps camping on the beach, a man named Gus Montrose, who used to work for Mr. Dodd, ding, 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 and a group of fishermen sneaking around the woods at night. Perhaps it's not too shocking, but the Hardy Boys manage to solve the case, alert the police, and get all the thieves arrested, including Gus Montrose. Plus, they recover all the stolen vehicles. The name Montrose encourages Mabel to look for Montrose gems. She goes to look, but who's following her? Tie-dye Hoodie is on the case. We end up 15 months forward, where we see Only Murderers in the Building, is a new podcast bound for release. Who do you suspect is the killer? Did we miss any clues? Write us on Facebook, facebook.com/doublephq, Twitter and Instagram @doublephq, or leave those YouTube comments. Before we review scenes from trailers which haven't appeared in the first 4 episodes, let's look at the feedback we've gotten. Dermot Campbell wrote on episode 3, he said the funniest scene was when Charles stood up and said, "Wow, she's beautiful," in reference to the cat painting of Barbara. Dermot said it was a proper laugh out loud, some absolute classic comedy in episode 3. We got more feedback from Germany, where they wrote, "I absolutely loved episode 3. It had some really funny moments. I lost it at the cat in the freezer. Also, I love that your podcast talked about the theme of the show, the musical theme. It seems so fitting. It is mysterious because of the minor chords, but then the major chords give it that optimistic feeling. Like it's saying, if we work together, we can solve this murder mystery. I was a fan of the music from the moment I heard it." This person wrote they were really surprised Oliver's dog got poisoned. They instantly suspected Sting, but the show is pointing its finger so hard at Sting, he might not have been the person at all. Howard seemed a bit suspicious in the beginning, but now I just think he's a weird guy. I think that he only acted in the fainting. Maybe he really has a secret related to the murder. They finish up their feedback by saying, "I'm also thinking about the show too often. It's gotten to the point where I now started having dreams about it at night. Today I dreamt of speaking to the corpse of Tim Kono, but Kono just did boring small talk. How's the weather now that I'm dead?" Way to go, Tim Kono. Thank you for that feedback. Patrick wrote, "I think that Tim killed Zoe on the night of the New Year's Eve party after an altercation where she accused him of seeing Mabel. Then, during the investigation of Zoe's murder, the police find stolen jewelry in her room connecting the murder to jewelry thefts that have been happening in the building. They'd go to investigate the remaining Hardy Boys to find that Oscar had the keys from his dad, the super, making him a prime suspect in the jewelry thefts. Doesn't help that he's the super's kid and they're probably not as wealthy as the other residents. It's easy to demonize him. He's locked up for theft, and when he gets out, he decides to kill Tim and Mabel. Tim especially, because in this theory, Tim murdered Zoe, which led to Oscar's arrest." Ooh, we love theories. Please send them in, everybody. Our last bit of feedback before we get to feedback tied to the trailers, Matthew Hervey wrote, "OMG, I've been searching for someone else trying to solve the murder, but all the other YouTube videos are just reviewing. Thank you." Well, thank you, Matthew. Folks, we live on your feedback. We're going to solve this together. It's not let me solve it. It's not let you solve it. It's let's us together solve Only Murders in the Building. If you want to jump out now before we cover scenes from the trailer, which haven't been in the show yet, once again, please give us some feedback. Reach out to us, subscribe, like, thumbs up, anything you can do to help us spread the word. The more people who help, the easier it'll be to solve who killed Tim Kono. For everybody else, let's dive into those trailer scenes. And before we get to those, let's talk about some feedback which mentioned things from the trailer. Jay wrote, "I find it interesting that Charles didn't want to crawl through the vents to get into Bunny's apartment with Mabel. But in the previews, Mabel finds a bloody knife in a vent. If Charles killed Tim, that could be why he was against going through the vents, because he didn't want Mabel to find the evidence. But why is there a bloody knife if Tim was shot in the head?" Ooh, Jay, that is a great question. Could we have more victims? We also had Maddie write this bit of feedback where she said, "In one of these trailers, Oliver is literally wearing a tie-dye hoodie." Ooh, well, let's get to that, everybody. In the trailers, there's a scene down in the lobby. It looks a lot like the memorial for Tim Kono, but it was not the memorial for Tim Kono. This one has cops there. We see a shot of Mabel, Charles, and Oliver there in the lobby, but Oliver is wearing a tie-dye hoodie which across the front says, "Only Murders in the Building." If we had to guess, this is most likely Oliver having a merch store for the podcast where you could buy your own tie-dye hoodie. We also have a scene of Charles possibly doing a live podcast recording for a group of fans. There's an interesting shot which I think might be from the very final episode. It's in the courtyard of the Arconia, and there are a lot of people there, including Lester the doorman and Arnov, who are looking very suspiciously at the camera, aka a a character who could be walking through the courtyard being arrested. We have multiple scenes featuring Detective Williams, the police officer we met in the first episode. One where she's meeting the trio down at the water, a second one where she seems to be in her apartment debating with someone if the cat, aka Evelyn, committed the crime. We have a couple of scenes that are very important to focus on. First, most likely for next week's episode, we see Mabel tackle the Thai guy person and stab at them with a needle. We see scenes of podcast fans outside the Arconia really getting excited. More scenes of Miss Adoko. We see a couple of Theo, Demas, Teddy Demas shushing somebody. We have Uma, the bird lady, peeking out her door. Then, very important, we see a scene of Charles's suspect board where we have the name Zoe written on an index card, as well as a big picture of a ring next to it. This ring in the photo is green, and it may be the ring I kept calling black. I called it black because the scene was so dark, but it could be the ring that was on Zoe's picture. That was on Zoe's finger in the infamous picture of the four Hardy Boys. Another image we see is a toxology report of Tim Kono. Was Tim Kono poisoned so it was easier to get in and shoot him in the head? Or were multiple people trying to kill Tim Kono? We see Mabel with Oliver trying to pick a lock and get into a door. She says that Charles taught her how to do it, but we haven't seen that happen so far. We see a couple scenes of Mabel sneaking around what looks like either a morgue or a mortuary. We see Mabel dump all the jewelry she's found on a pool table, while Charles, Oliver, and some other people gather around and look. Actress Jane Lynch will be showing up later, plus we see Jan entering her apartment and looking at possibly a threatening note. Someone looking through binoculars out a window, possibly at Charles, the way the edit is cut together. Mabel finds a secret passage in somebody's apartment. Psst! Spoiler alert. The white columns really do resemble what you would see in Teddy Demas's apartment. In the secret room, there seem to be lots of urns. Is that what the room is lined with? Finally, we have a shot of Charles and a woman who is dressed and acts an awful lot like Charles. Is this a picture of Emma? Is this something else we should consider? What's going on in this photo? All right, we've talked about all these scenes that haven't come up yet. Does that help you solve who the killer is? Write to us on the comments below, like the video, subscribe to the podcast at DoublePHQ on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook.com/DoublePHQ.